Hey everybody, good afternoon, good evening. I am Romi Hill, and this is the kickoff for my 2023 Summer of Lace knit along. If you've been following me on Instagram and on Facebook and Ravelry, you'll have seen me talk about this. Also, my newsletter, you may have read something in there. So I just let me adjust my captioning here. This doesn't look like it's working very well. Okay, I think there we go. Alrighty. Okay, so speech to text is working now. So I added this because I know that there are some people out there who are hard of hearing who would like to watch the live. And even though YouTube comes along later and adds captions, um, it doesn't really help like while the live is going on. So that is what this is for. I've done my best to go through this whole thing and make sure that Pearl is spelled Purl and and other things like that. But there may be some very weird words in there. So hopefully this will go off okay. So anyway, again, I am Romi Hill, and I am the designer behind Designs by Romi. I love lace knitting. I just think it's fascinating. I love the geometry of it. I love the different stitches. I love that you can just take your knit purl yarn over, just really simple stitches and make them into these beautiful, beautiful patterns. So I am hoping that when you watch this, when you watch my series, this is my first of 6 lives throughout my knit along. And I'm hoping that you'll join me, at least for some of them. And if not, you can come later and take a look at them. And I just want to share my love of lace knitting with you and hopefully convert some of you to lace lovers if you're not already. So, hi everybody. I can see you in the chat. So, I'm so happy that you're here. And I am actually watching the chat. So, these are all, and if you want to ask questions, you just need to subscribe to my channel and then make sure that you're signed in, and then you can be in the live chat. Sometimes it works kind of strangely. I had to limit the live chat to subscribers because there have been people before who come in and it was a little odd. So I'm trying to keep bots out and weird comments and stuff. So that is sort of what's behind my limiting the chat. So as long as you're subscribed and signed in, you will be able to chat live. And then I'm also watching your chat so I can see if you have any questions or anything. So there's a little bit of a delay. So there's a delay from my getting to you probably about 6 or 7 seconds or so. And it depends on how much is buffering for the stream. And then I'll see your message in the chat. I'm so excited to see you here. So I'm seeing you all, and it's fantastic. Um, but I will answer your question. So don't worry. The other thing I have to warn you about is there are thunderstorms coming down over the mountains. So there's a slight possibility that lightning will strike the cell tower near me. Um, and if that happens and I lose power, I will come back later and kind of go over all the rest of the stuff that I wanted to go over and wasn't able to go over. So anyway, concurrent with this knit along, I'm also having a sale. So if you have not chosen a pattern yet, if you use code Super Summer Sale, you can get 30% off discount in both my Ravelry and my designsbyromi.com stores. So that runs through the end of June. And after that sale is over, I'm going to be taking down a lot of my patterns. So I've been designing things for more than 15 years. So I've learned a lot along the way. I've learned a lot about the process and about what is clearer to people and all sorts of things. And I want to go back and add everything that I've learned to those patterns. I think we have an incredible opportunity in the digital age to be able to go back and bring things up to kind of today's idea of a pattern, and then put those back out there. So they'll be down. If you purchase them beforehand, you will also get the update when they go back up. So there you go. Jump on it. Grab your stuff. And so let's go into this. I'm just saying hi, everybody. Wendy, someone asked if it has started. Yes, it started. I don't know if you can see this. I can see myself because I'm monitoring. So hopefully everything is okay. Okay, so how to choose your perfect project. So as far as I'm concerned, anything with holes in it counts for this knit along. So the first time I started knitting any type of open work with yarn overs in it, I I found that it was a steep learning curve for me. And at the time, this was a while back, there was a group called Knitting Beyond the Hebrides, and it was all these incredibly experienced knitters. And so I was just like, oh my God, I'm an idiot. Like I don't know any of this stuff. So I learned a lot, and at first, it was like a huge learning curve. So it was really hard for me, even though I had been knitting for years and years, like decades at that point, since I was a child. Um, it was really hard for me to make the leap from just knitting like cables and plain textured stitches to knitting lace. And at first, I was really discouraged. And luckily, I had a friend who lived near me who was just like, oh, no, no, that's totally normal. And she really, really helped me get through that first part of the, oh my God, what am I doing wrong phase. And so I am hoping to be that person for any of you out there who are just beginning to knit lace. So let's see if you have any comments. So let's see. Yay, Yvonne, you're knitting Dark Wing. That's awesome. One of my favorites. It's a small one skein shawl. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is how do you choose your project? And I'm just going to tell you how I chose my first project, which may or may not help you. When I really wanted to knit lace, I didn't want to start on something that I didn't like because I thought it was going to be a process. Having just done a little bit of swatching and I did an open work sweater. An open work is it has holes in it, but it's not a super lacy type of thing. It's basically patterning with holes in it. So it's not really considered lace, but it does have yarn overs and and matching decreases. So I thought, okay, well, I really want to use something that I'm absolutely going to love. So I didn't want to start with kind of a simpler type of thing, and I jumped right in with both feet. And I found this beautiful square Shetland style shawl. And in the shawl, you would knit the center portion of it. It was a big square, all in lace. And then you bind it off and pick up stitches all the way around the edges. So when I started out, I didn't know how to read my lace. I didn't know how to compare it to the chart and tell where I was in my knitting. And so I must have ripped that thing out 15 times, maybe more, because I really wasn't sure where I was. And I would make a mistake and I didn't know how to fix it or do anything. And so it was definitely a learning curve, but by the end of the project, I was able to knit lace. And that's kind of how I feel. I mean, if you want to learn how to knit lace, like here are your training wheels. There's me, and then there's the awesome moderators and community in my Ravelry group and my Facebook group. And this is the perfect time for you just to jump and find the pattern that you love and like just jump right in. And we'll be there and like be your friend through the process. And at the end of it, hopefully you will just love it as much as I did when I finally got to the end of the shawl. So that's my philosophy, although I will be classifying all of my patterns as sort of beginner, intermediate, and advanced. And I will put those up in a playlist. Honestly, I keep thinking of so many more things to do every day to make this process easier for you. So I'm just going to be adding more stuff in. There will be a complete playlist with descriptions of shawls and the techniques, cast on techniques and bind off and all of that good stuff. So let me see. Lyrica Euterpe, yay, beautiful together. I love all these shawls. Effervescent, yay. Okay, let's go to how to choose a yarn. So I'm just going to head on over here. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is what your lace is going to look like when you start knitting it. And this is especially the case if you use a lace weight yarn. Your lace is going to look horrible, and that is absolutely to be expected. So one of the reasons I love to do a swatch and block it out beforehand is because then when I see this type of horrible looking thing, I can remind myself that when I block it out, it's going to be absolutely beautiful. So this is alpaca lace and it's on US 6 needles and it's completely unblocked. So sometimes people decide that when they see something like this, they want to go down some needle sizes. So I just want to show you, this is alpaca lace. It's the same pattern, but this is on US 0 needles. And you can see that it still looks terrible. It still looks like something that the cat dragged in. And this is a completely and totally normal thing. So because of all this negative space in the lace patterning, you just have to reset your yarn and pull it out and stretch it into the shape that you want it to go into. And that's both wonderful because you can get away with a lot of stuff with your lace patterning. And it's also kind of frustrating because while you're working with it, it looks terrible. Sometimes it looks okay, you know, depending on how much lace there is. The more lacy your patterning is, the more it will look horrible like this. So you can see even going down lots and lots of needle sizes, that does not solve your problem. So what you're really looking for is a really beautiful lacy look. And here is that same, this is the US 6 needles, and this is after it's blocked. That's the same pattern. So you can see here that really all you needed to do was block that lace. It can be a little bit discouraging, especially if you are kind of a tight knitter and you're used to seeing that nice, tight, tidy fabric. It won't look like that while you're knitting. And it can be hard to get used to, but blocking magic will happen for you and it will turn out absolutely gorgeous. So this is 100% alpaca lace. If this is your first time, you might not want to start with a lace weight. You might want to start with something heavier. So let's go through this. I did a bunch of swatches, um, and they're all the same pattern that I just showed you. That's the same pattern motif. So this is 100% silk, and this one is 100% merino. So I'm just going to lay that over the top there so you can see the difference in size. I knit both of these on US 6 needles and I blocked them to the same size. So I've been carrying these around with me, and they've been in my teaching supplies and all of that. And you can see this silk here has kept its block much better. And this is 100% merino. The merino has shrunk back. So merino, because it has a lot of memory, is going to kind of remember where it was before. And after you block it, it's going to spring back a little. So, or a lot, actually. The first shawl that I ever knitted was merino lace weight, and I blocked it huge. It was a massive square shawl, and now I would say it's two-thirds the size of what I blocked it out to be. So think about how much difference this is with these two swatches and compound that across your entire project. So you can actually end up with a much smaller project than what you thought it was going to be. So I'm just going to check the comments here to make sure everything is going okay. And yay, Mariette, I'm so glad you're going to be doing your first one. I'm so excited. Okay, so what does that mean for you? Here's another couple of different swatches. So I think the most important thing to remember is to take a look at what the designer specifies as the type of yarn used. And if you want those same results, then you need to find something that is close to that type of yarn. That being said, you can really knit in any kind of yarn, and all you have to do is follow some guidelines. So in general, if you have a silk or anything like a linen or any type of rayon. So when I say rayon, that's anything that's extruded, like a cellulose fiber or like milk, corn, bamboo, any of those things, that's going to have very, very little memory. So when you're working with that, it's going to be larger. So if your shawl is written for a merino yarn, for instance, I have a shawl that I wrote specifically for a very bouncy yarn, my Ponte di Rialto, and it's absolutely huge when you block it out because I took advantage of the fact that it's an incredibly bouncy yarn. So once it was blocked out, it shrank back to about half the size that it was before. So for instance, if you want to do that with a silk, you're going to have to go down needle sizes to do that. See if there are any more questions. Okay. Just wanted to make sure. Um, so devoted to knit, that certainly made up my mind. Can't believe how much difference. Do you have a swatch in the linen? I don't have a linen swatch, but this silk here is basically what your linen would look like. So um, if you're knitting with anything like a linen or hemp or silk, any of those, you are going to have no memory, basically. It's going to be drapier. I mean, I think it's really beautiful. And I absolutely I love the way it looks. It's going to be drapey. Um, One of the things is when you're holding it, you also aren't going to be able to stretch out the yarn as much as you're knitting. So that's one of the things that makes it a larger gauge. And the other thing is that it just doesn't have the memory that a merino or a wool would. So when you stretch it out, it pretty much stays the same size that you blocked it to. So that it's like a real bang for your buck if you have a skein, like even a small skein of silk or linen or bamboo, milk, corn, any of those types of fiber with no memory. It's going to be bigger and it's going to keep its block and be drapey and lovely. And let me see. And then Marianne said, I wish I could knit as lovely as you do. So I just want, because you said that, I just want to point out again what this looked like before I blocked it. That's what it looks like before you block it. So if you are getting something like this, truly do not despair at all. Um, that is what it looks like. So you're just going to, you need to stretch it out and block it. And I will talk a little bit about that later on. And I just want to make sure I have everybody's questions. Yes, Sunny said, I'm hoping you will also mention superwash and regular. Absolutely. And then Marianne, what does mulberry silk do? It seems very bouncy. I have not heard, I've not actually experienced any bouncy mulberry silk. So the spin of the fiber is going to be an issue. So for instance, this one is raw silk. So it's not mulberry silk. Mulberry silk tends to be much shinier and doesn't have this, like this is a matte finish, but it reacts very similarly to this type of raw silk. It's a little bit heavier. So unless mulberry silk is a chainette, it's generally not bouncy and it is generally very drapey like this. So you're going to find that there is not much memory to a mulberry silk unless the spin of it is a chainette. And a chainette is kind of like a tiny little I-cord. And sometimes yarn companies will use that to give fiber bounce where there is no bounce. So, for instance, there are a lot of cotton and microfiber yarns that use a chainette construction, and that gives them a little bit more loft and memory so that they aren't as heavy and they bounce back more. So you may have had some experience with that construction. And then Yvonne, did Yvonne have a question? I didn't see. Let's see. Check for Yvonne's question back here. Um, so you mentioned, Wendy, you mentioned Yvonne's question. Can you let me know what that was? Because I cannot, I can't find it. I'm sorry. Um, let's see. So Marianne says, yes, not bouncy reminds me of twine. It can feel kind of like twine when you're knitting with it. Um, and so that brings me to another thing. When you're knitting with lace, you want to knit kind of loosely. So if you're a tight knitter, you're going to find it to be difficult when you go on and when you try to do the decreases. So you might want to try a little bit to loosen up. Okay, so silk here. So what if I wanted to substitute in, instead of silk, I want to use this merino here. Yvonne asked, which fiber stays most true when blocked? I would say that silk and plant fibers like hemp and linen, those will keep your block best of all, and they'll drape the most as well. So this is a merino, and you can see that the pattern is still really beautiful in it. It just has bounced back. So that's what it used to look like when I blocked it. can see how much that stretches out there. So that's what it looked like when I first blocked it because I stretched it like crazy. And now it's bounced back. So it still looks pretty. It just isn't as big as your as a linen or silk or something like that. Okay, so on to superwash versus non-superwash. In general, a superwash does not have as much memory as a non-superwash yarn. And so you're going to find different amounts of stretch. And I like to take a few bits of yarn and kind of do a quick stretch test to see how much they stretch. To see Let's grab another piece of yarn here. So just to compare, I will often just take some yarn and stretch it in my fingers to see how much it stretches. So this top one here is a silk and blue face Leicester, and the bottom one here is superwash merino. So they're both a 2-ply yarn. The top one is a lace weight. The bottom one is a fingering weight. And I'm just going to stretch these and see how much stretch. So if I release this and then stretch, I can actually stretch out the bottom one farther than the top. It's hard to show up here, but you can see how much that bottom stretches out. And then the top one really doesn't change all that much. So that tells me that the top one is going to keep the block a lot better than the bottom one. So see how stretchy that is? You can stretch it out really far and then it bounces back and kind of fluffs up. So this top one, there's just not as much stretch to it. So there's not a lot of memory and there's not much of a difference between its stretched and unstretched states. But this bottom one is way stretchier. So that tells you that once you're finished with your project, the top one is going to hold its block for a much longer time than this bottom yarn here. So question, um, I did not talk about alpaca. So Elizabeth, I will talk about alpaca specifically. And and then Marianne is asking about types of blends. Yes, yes. The top one here, this one is silk and Blueface Leicester. And anytime you see something that has a blend, so if you have like silk with some animal fiber or linen with an animal fiber. So there have been a lot of linens and wools out lately. That's going to cut down some of the memory. It's going to make it a little bit drapier, but it's probably, if you haven't had experience knitting with pure silk or pure linen, it's probably going to be nicer on your hands. So that's a good place to go if you don't want to hold something that feels more like twine might feel, especially if you're a tight knitter. So a blend like that is going to be your friend. And then alpaca, alpaca actually has less memory than a wool does. So this is alpaca lace weight. Alpaca tends to be a heavier fiber than wool. And depending on its spin, it usually will keep a block really well. So the less memory that something has, the heavier the fiber, the more it's going to keep its block. So I actually did this massive long swatch. If you've ever been in a class with me in person, you may have seen the swatch of doom. I did a swatch that has all sorts of different yarns in it. And so I can kind of go over these and talk a little bit about each one and its characteristics. This one at the bottom here is an undyed 100% Rambouillet wool, and it's super, super stretchy. You can see the spin on it. You can see like this little piece of yarn here. So if I pull it, see how much that stretches? So that has lots and lots of stretch. It's spun somewhat loosely and there's tons of stretch to it. So that means that if you use it in a lace project, it's going to scrunch back to a smaller size. So it's not going to keep a really nice block for lace. But so if you want to use this, you're going to use a little bit of a larger needle and some more yardage to make a larger project. And let's see, question about what percent wool do you think is minimum in any blend for a successful lace blocking? Does superwash still work? So superwash does work. So wool, it it depends on the spin as well. So this one right here is 100% superwash wool, and it's a single. And a single, even though it's 100% wool, tends to keep its block better. So this one is a little bit wider than the bottom here. It's too bad we're not all in a classroom together. I could pass this around and you can stretch them all. But this one is a 100% superwash wool single. And that one keeps a better block than this Rambouillet at the bottom here. So minimum in any blend. So I personally like, I really like the 50% silk and 50% Blueface Luster. That's one of my favorite blends. So I think that this gives you a little fluffiness and it also gives you a nice drape to it. So it's sort of the best of both worlds. You don't have all the memory of 100% wool, but you also don't feel like you're knitting with twine when you're working with it. So I really like those 50-50 blends. I love those, the single that has some silk and wool and yak in it it's really nice. It usually has about 15% yak. I think that's beautiful. It keeps a lovely block. And something that has alpaca and silk or both in it, like the floating behind me, the purple shawl here is done in a base called floating, and it's alpaca, silk, and cashmere, and it keeps a really beautiful block as well. And then let's see. Okay, just making sure that I got everybody's questions. Okay, so this one again is super wash, and I'm just going to do the stretch test here. So that top one was the Rambouillet. The bottom one is the superwash wool. And you can see that really stretches. The superwash, not so much. The single doesn't really stretch very much. So that's going to give you a better block. And Marianne asked what brand the yarn is. I think you were talking about this one, but I'm not sure. Um, This one is from a dyer who went out of business, but this base is still available from a lot of other dyers. So just look for 50% Blueface Luster or BFL and 50% silk, and you'll get this this type of yarn. And I think Sunshine Yarns does it. So she does some really pretty ones too. And I've used hers before. Okay, so this one is a two ply. When you have a two ply yarn, it's going to be a little bit more bouncy, even though this one is super wash. And this one I think is an MCN. So merino, cashmere, and nylon. So it's super wash, so you have a little bit less memory in there. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about variegated yarns. This one is a very slightly tonal variegation. So this one is also, I think, an MCN. Yep. Okay, this one is a merino cashmere and silk, which is about the same as the merino cashmere nylon. And you can see on there, it's got a slight tonal variegation to it, but it does not have enough to obstruct the pattern. So if you're going to be using a variegated yarn and you want to see the pattern unobstructed, a light variegation like this, just a tonal yarn, it could look very, very pretty in your lace patterning. Okay, so up here, this one is naturally dyed, and sometimes naturally dyed yarns have less of a memory than commercially acid-based dyes do. For some reason, I don't know why. This one has a little less memory. So even though it's the same blend as some other yarns um, that are in my swatch, this has a little bit less memory than the others. And here we have another example of a tonal variegation. So that can look very, very pretty. Okay, so let's scoot on over here to something that I don't think looks as nice. So I have two blue and green variegated yarns here. So here's one of them right here, and here is another right above here. So I think the one above looks much better than the one below here. This one below it is pooling in very strange ways. And the really interesting thing is that these two look almost identical in the ball. So when I started to work with these, I had no idea that they would turn out looking so different when they were knit up. And I think that is the biggest problem with knitting with a variegated yarn when you're doing lace. You just never know exactly what it's going to do. So my suggestion is if you have a variegated yarn that you want to do for this project, you might want to use it in tandem with a solid yarn. So for instance, you might want to do something like swoop, where you have stripes. And one yarn, the variegated, can be one of the stripes, and then the solid can be the other. And so you have it broken up and you won't get into a pooling mess like this. Okay, this one is a Shetland yarn. So let's talk a little bit about how the spin really affects the fiber. So this one is a woolen spun yarn. And if you were to hold it in your hand, you would find that it was super fluffy. Let me grab, here's what it looks like. So this is kind of a thick and thin yarn here. And this is a lot like a lot of the Brooklyn tweed yarns are woolen spun and they look like this and they're very lofty. So just super fluffy and fuzzy. So what a woolen spun yarn is when they're preparing it to spin, the fibers are going to be just facing in all sorts of different directions. And when it's spun, it ends up being very light and very fluffy and very lofty, and it can be very fragile. So it's easy to break it if you're a tight knitter. So that helps it keep its block as well. So this one here, you can maybe see how this widens out from this yarn below it. That one kept a really nice block. It's the woolen spun tends to keep a great block. And you can tell by just taking a look at the yarn here. Do you see how fuzzy that looks? Just cozy and fuzzy and fluffy. So a worsted spun yarn is not like a worsted weight. So any yarn can be worsted spun. And what that means is that they have prepared the yarn by putting all the fibers parallel to one another before it's spun. So it's going to be a much more hard wearing yarn. And lots of sock yarns are spun worsted or partially worsted. So because that gives it a lot more strength and helps it stick around longer with fewer holes. Let me check. Just want to make sure I'm getting everybody's questions here. Shout out. So, what brand is the rose yarn, if I may ask? So, Marianne, this gorgeous yarn here, unfortunately, is a dyer that went out of business. So, sadly, because I loved her yarn. And let's see. Um, Wendy. Okay. British wool. Marianne asked about British wool. There is, um, there's a company, I think you might mean the company is called British Wool, and they have Gansey yarns, and those are worsted spun. So I don't know if that is your question. But the company called British Wool has a worsted spun Gansey yarn, and it's very hard wearing, and it's very thick and springy. So that one is a worsted spun yarn. And then does it help when you're go forth and knit? Does it help when your yarn superwash when you wind your yarn into a cake to rewind? Yes, yes, yes. So there was a question about winding yarn and how many times to wind it into a cake. And it does really help. So when you're winding from a hank, sometimes your ball winder will get a little bit too tight, and it does actually help to rewind it a couple of times. So I actually rewind my yarn 2 times before I knit with it. And that's depending on how tight it winds up. But yes, that is really helpful. Okay, so this was woolen spun, and this one is a really good example of a worsted spun yarn. This is a tight twist, and it's a very springy yarn. So this is a sock yarn. It's going to be denser and stretchier, and it's got a very tight twist to it. This one is alpaca silk that I was talking about before, and you can see it's a slight variegation. Um, and I think it looks really nice in a lace pattern. So other ones of interest, this one here is slightly thicker, but it's a silk and wool, I believe. Let me make sure that I have that blend correct. It is merino, nylon, and tencel. So that will keep a really nice block as well. And this one here, we're back to a single. I love the way the single looks in lace. I think it gives you a really nice block, and it gives you a block that's sort of in between um, a really super stretchy merino and silk. So you have a little bit of a woolly feeling to it, but it also, because it's a single and it doesn't have a lot of memory, it also keeps a really nice block to it. And here is another woolen spun yarn. This one's a little bit heavier. It keeps a super nice block. And another woolen spun at the bottom. Okay, Let's put the swatch of doom away for now. So one thing you might consider, um, this is this is a really nice yarn. This is a silk and merino single. So it hardly has any stretch to it at all, but it's beautiful. Like it's really beautiful yarn to knit with. So Keith asked, don't singles pill more? You know, they can pill, but for lace, you're going to treat it pretty kindly. So it's not like it's a sweater that you're going to be wearing. On a sweater, I think, or socks or something like that, you have to worry more about pilling. But when you're knitting lace, you're already treating it kind of more with special care. So I haven't actually had any problems with my singles pilling just because there aren't really areas of friction. So I think I think you would be pleased with a single in working in lace. I really like the way it looks. Okay, so what if you find this absolutely gorgeous shawl that you really want to work and you don't want to use lace weight yarn? So you don't have to. You can actually substitute different types of yarn. So here is an example of mousse lace. This is lace that's worked in a worsted weight. So don't don't be put off if you see this beautiful pattern and you think, oh, I really want to do that pattern, but I really don't want to do lace weight. Just take, fingering sport worsted. I did purless and a super bulky, and it was really fun and cozy and huge of a hug. So if you do want to substitute in a yarn that's heavier than what it's written for, I would say take a look at the ball band on the yarn that you want to use and use a needle that is a couple of sizes bigger than what the ball band says. And you'll get a big enough fabric so that you can block it out into a really pretty lace. And Marianne asked, what's my all-time favorite yarn? Oh, wow, it varies so much. But I will say, I think it's between mohair silk because I have always loved mohair and floating. So floating is a yarn from a verb for keeping warm, and I do my mystery in it every year, and it's like my treat for the year. So it's this beautiful alpaca, cashmere, and silk, and it's so soft and just it keeps a block beautifully and it drapes beautifully. And I just love it. And then a question, what do you think about cashmere? Cashmere is wonderful. There are different grades and different spins. So usually it's pretty light and it keeps a block really beautifully. And I like it a lot. I've used June cashmere quite a few times and I like their yarn a lot. So okay, so let's talk a little bit about beads. So I'm just going to do a quick little thing about beads here. Um, a lot of my designs have beads in them, and I just want to have a little bit of a caution here about red beads. They are not always color fast. So if you're going to use red beads like these, you definitely need to do a wet swatch. So you're going to use these in your swatch and then block it out to make sure that the color doesn't bleed. So these beads are size 6-0 and they're they're pretty much the largest seed beads. You can go a little bit bigger. Um, they're called size 50 or pony beads. And I think they're a little too big, but I really like the size 6-0. And they are 6-0 is larger than 8-0. Um, so is larger than 12-0. And they're measured by how many are supposed to be able to fit into an inch when they're strung. So size 6-0 bead, 6 are supposed to fit into an inch when they're strung. Okay, and then Susan says hi from Switzerland, bought the charmeuse pattern. A new, okay. Oh, I'm so happy. I'm so happy you bought that one because I love my charmeuse pattern. Um, okay. Oh, that's great. I love that. It's such a great pattern. Um, it was just a lot of fun to knit, so I'm so happy that you chose that one. Okay, and let's see. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about gauge. Marianne is talking about gauge. I'm just going to finish up with the beads, and then I will talk about gauge. Okay, so when you're choosing beads for your project, you'll probably be tempted just to hold a bunch of beads on top of your project and see what they look like as far as color on your project. But they can look very, very, very different. So when you actually start knitting it up, it may look completely different from what you thought it would look like. So here is an example. This deep blue bead here did not look like it would look very good. So let's find this. I have these all strung up for you. Okay, so here's that blue bead. It looks a little odd, I think, when you just put it on top, but I really like it once it's in the fabric. That looks, that bead, that's just a shiny, shiny, brilliant little silver lined bead, and that looks like it's just a little too much for that swatch. But when it's knit in, it just looks like a little dewdrop. It's really pretty in it. So I just want to encourage you when you're choosing your beads um, to knit them into your swatch. So here, when I was first looking at this, I was thinking, oh, that goes along exactly perfectly with my yarn. But then when I knitted it in, it doesn't really show up very much. So I decided against it. And again, here's another kind of shiny bead here. These look a little they're a little bit of an off color. They're not quite the bright white of the others. They also look like little dewdrops. And in further lives, I will show you how to place beads. So that's one of the things to look forward to. But I just wanted to go over a little bit um, how to choose which one you want to use. Okay. The other thing about these is that these are Japanese seed beads, and you can see in there probably they have a nice hole. Japanese seed beads are much more uniform, and the hole is much more uniform. So if you can fit a crochet hook through one of these, you can probably fit it through almost every single bead in your package. Check seed beads are also super beautiful and they're great quality, but the holes are not usually of a uniform size. So that's something to think about. You don't have to get the most expensive Japanese seed bead. These are from Fire Mountain Gems, and they have a good price and they're pretty uniform. So uniform enough for lace knitting. They have a nice big hole to them. So let's see, other questions. Um, let me see. Okay. Alrighty, so let's talk about gauge. So Marianne was asking about gauge, and as you probably were noticing, I'm just gonna move my giant swatch aside here and grab my silk again. Okay, so it would be one thing if the gauge just shrank perfectly evenly all the way around, but as we all know, that does not happen. Um, the gauge can be just like way off. Sometimes it's wider, sometimes it's taller, and depending on your knitting style, that can also change the gauge. So I'm going to say with a lace shawl, the most important thing about gauge is just figuring out how much yardage you're going to use. So the because you're not looking for a perfect fit, what you're going after is the fabric that you like and the right amount of yardage. So for instance, if your gauge is huge, then you're going to use more yardage than the pattern calls for. However, if you like that gauge, if you like the way your fabric works, definitely, I mean, go ahead with that gauge and just get more yardage. So really, when you're not going after a specific fit, then the sky is the limit. Like you get to choose your fabric and your needles, however you want it to look. On the other hand, if your gauge is super small and you're expecting a large shawl that you can wrap around your shoulders a few times, and your gauge is much smaller, then you want to think about what the size is going to be. So I would say that it's not hugely important to have the exact gauge. What's important is that you like your yarn, you like your fabric, and you don't use too much yardage. So I get a little paranoid about people running out of yarn. The other thing to think about is you don't necessarily have to do a gauge swatch to measure it. You can start on your shawl and measure it that way. But I do want to call your attention to garter stitch. So there are a lot of my shawls that start with garter stitch. And here is unblocked garter stitch. And here is blocked garter stitch. So it's exactly the same number of rows and the same number of stitches, but you can see there is quite a difference here in the gauge. And that's going to be more exacerbated. Like the larger your needles are, the more that is going to be exacerbated. So when you're checking gauge and my pattern set gives you numbers, just understand that that is a blocked gauge. So this is the unblocked, this is the blocked. So over that whole shawl, that can make a really big difference. So let me make sure I am not ooh, Helen, you were saying Surrey alpaca. Yes, you can sub in Surrey alpaca for mohair and charmeuse. Yes, that would be beautiful. And let me see other questions. So Marianne, when you talk about 5 stitches per inch, are you talking about the ball band gauge or the pattern gauge? So a ball band gauge is something to take with a grain of salt. For sure. I've never seen a ball band gauge that is all that um, close to reality, I guess. And then Helen says, I always have to go down a size or two with garter. For some weird reason, garter stitch is the one stitch that has the most different results for different knitters. And I don't know why, but Um, my shawls that I've designed with lots of garter stitch are the ones where people tend either to have half a skein left or run out of yarn and on the same shawl get engaged. So it's just one of those things, one of those really weird things. So Marianne, okay, you said pattern gauge. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about um, how to measure gauge. So here's a swatch. Okay, so if you're gonna check your gauge with a swatch beforehand, and I do actually suggest it, especially when you're just starting out with with lace, just to get an idea of your gauge when you're knitting. So if they give you a gauge of, say, 16 inches or 16 stitches over 4 inches and 24 rows over 4 inches, I would at least double that. So in other words, at least 32 stitches wide and 48 rows. So whatever it is, at least double it. So once you have worked your swatch, and this will sometimes it will be in stockinette, sometimes it'll be in garter, sometimes in lace. But for a shawl, you are going to work a swatch and then you're going to treat it exactly how you would treat your finished object. So for this one, I'm going to stretch the ever-loving crap out of it. I am going to stretch this so tight when I block it because I want that really nice lace pattern to open up. So I'm going to take my trusty blocking wires here, and this is just TIG welding rod that I got at a hardware store. So it's 100% stainless steel, um, just rods of stainless steel. I think they're about a 14 gauge. So I'm just going to take my swatch and I'm going to wet it completely. So that's like when you hear someone talking about a fully dressed swatch, that means you're going to wash it and then you're going to pin it out and let it dry pinned out. So pretend that I have washed this. I'm not going to do it right now because that would be a disaster. I probably would short everything out. So pretend this is wet. So I'm just going to take my blocking wire and I am going to weave it in and out of the side here. So on each side. And this is this is a square. You can also do this. There are some really handy little things. They're called knit blockers. And I know that Knitter's Pride has them, knit blockers. They have little teeth in there and they're super handy. So you can use those too. But what you're looking for is you want a straight edge across here. So I know that lace looks really delicate, but when it's wet, it's actually super strong. So don't feel bad about stretching it really hard. We call it blocking thuggishly. It's just sort of like a little joke. Let me see if there are any questions here. Okay. Alrighty. So when I block my swatches, I always wash them out with a wool wash, and I always wash all of the wool wash out because I've had an experience where it oxidized and kind of changed the color of the yarn, and I don't want that to happen. Okay, so I have two sides. I'm just going to weave in and out on the sides as well and kind of look over here and make sure that I'm not missing anybody's questions. So if you have never done lace before and you like um, chunky, chunky knits, like chunky shawls, one of my patterns purless has actually been modified for a chunky yarn, and that one is pretty fun. So that one would be a fun one to knit if you kind of want to get used to yarn overs and decreases, but you don't want to use a super light yarn. Okay. So the other thing that you can do instead of this type of swatch, if you're fairly sure that you have close to the gauge, is you can steam and block the start of your shawl. And that will also give you a good idea of what your fabric is going to look like. And you won't have to actually do a whole swatch. So you can just start the shawl, and that will be your swatch. So there's so many different ways to do swatches. You don't have to do this whole, you don't have to go through this whole thing. So I know a lot of people just like to start knitting. Okay, so once I have these woven in and out, I'm just going to pin out my sides here, and I stretch it pretty tight. So you can see across here, it's stretched pretty tight. So if this is wet, don't worry. Wet material is actually stronger than dry material, so you are not going to hurt it. Okay, so here I am. You can see that this does lose some block from when you first pin it out. I'm just going to pin this whole thing out. And up above here, I'm going to pin that out as well. So this is what it's going to look like as I'm drying it so I can measure my gauge. So when you're looking at the gauge and a pattern, you can see how that is stretched pretty tight. So let me just take this out of its holder for a moment so you can get more of a picture of what it looks like. So that's what it looks like, all stretched out like that. Um, so oftentimes people will say, oh, I swatched, but I'm way off. My gauge is much, much too small. I'm going to go up needle sizes, not realizing that when you stretch your fabric out to block it like this, it grows enormously. So hugely. So best to show you by this here. Okay. Let me turn this over so you can see it better. Okay, so somehow I've lost my, I seem to have lost my connection here, but I'm not sure why. Okay. So for some reason I've lost my connection, but I don't know why I lost my connection to my camera uh, on my hands. I don't know what I did, but I obviously did something. But anyway, I think I'm incapable of like having something go entirely right every single time. So I think I do actually have another cord around, and I will try. Oh well. Anyway, I'll just show you like this, and I'll deal with this later. Okay. So remember when you're thinking about gauge, This top one here is unblocked, and then the bottom one is blocked. So when you're measuring your gauge, it's going to make a huge difference. You always need to you always need to do a blocked gauge to figure this out. Okay, let's see if I have any more questions. Um, okay, no more questions for now. Just want to make sure that I have pretty much gotten through everything I was going to get through. Um, Tools, knitting needles for lace. Definitely your choice. A lot of people like to use bamboo or some type of wood because they're not quite as slippery. If you have gotten used to knitting lots of lace and you are feeling really comfortable with it and it's like super easy, you don't feel like your stitches are going to fall off of your needles or anything like that, um, then definitely you have your pick. I like to use metal needles sometimes, and then my favorite are these. These are carbons. So they're kind of in between, they're Knitter's Pride. They're kind of in between a wood and metal. They have a nickel tip here, and then this is carbon fiber. So it gets warm in your hands, kind of like wood, and it's a little bit stickier than just pure metal. I really like them a lot. They also come in an exchangeable uh, needle size, needle sets. Yeah. So let me see. I had a couple of other questions to make sure. Yes, devoted to knit. Will you tell us how exactly to count the gauge when blocked? Absolutely. So it can be a little difficult. You can see that all of these stitches in the patterning here are actually different sizes. So if you take a look at that, those yarn overs there, those are, some of them are bigger up at the top. And this is just part of lace patterning. So the way that things pull and the way that they come together in other places, that is what makes up the whole patterning of lace. So this is normal, and it's something that you're going to see in pretty much any type of lace that you knit. So instead of counting stitches like you normally would, what I like to do is count motifs. So in other words, I take my ruler and I measure the width of a motif, figure out how many stitches are in the motif, and that's how I figure out my gauge. So how many rows are in the motif, how many stitches are in the motif, and how wide and how tall. So this is, I think this is 10 stitches wide and 20 stitches tall, something like that, or 20 rows tall. So I'm going to measure how wide and how tall it is, and that's how I'm going to figure out my gauge by the number of stitches in the width of the motif and the number of rows in the length of the motif. And that way you get an average stitch size that's going to give you a way more accurate representation of your gauge than if you were to just count stitches across. Let me make sure. Let's see. Okay. Oh, and the tencel is gorgeous from Trailhead. Diane said she purchased it and it's really beautiful. The tencel is a lot like silk in that it doesn't have memory. So that's going to keep a really nice blog. And let's see, other questions. Okay, I think I have most questions answered. Um, And then I'm also going to, if you have any other questions like that I didn't cover in this or that this brought up for you, let me know and I'll be going over this more later and I can add other little tutorials to this playlist. Um, and so what I'm going to do next, I'm just going to go through my teeny tiny tutorials, add the ones to the playlist that I think will be helpful for you for casting on. And I'm also going to make a few other ones to make sure that I have all of my cast-ons and my patterns kind of covered. I'm going to do a little kind of rating maybe of my patterns and talk a little bit about what type of cast on or if they're a regular construction or a different type of construction or something like that. Which ones are more beginning, which ones are more advanced, some that are good for intrepid beginners. So I'm just going to be adding more stuff. So I hope that you check back and kind of, I'll be adding to this area a lot. And then let's see, any other questions? Okay. Okay. Awesome. Okay, so I think I'm gonna call it a day for today because the thunderstorm actually has begun. And so watch here. Also, if you haven't signed up for my newsletter, there's a link in the description. Definitely sign up for my newsletter because I will be sending out more stuff about different patterns and news and everything. And then we are also knitting together in both my Facebook group and in my Ravelry group, and I'll put those links in the description. And let's see, any other questions? Okay. I will. Yvonne said, please add your favorite knitted cast on. I absolutely will. And I will add a lot more because I have different types of cast-ons for my different shawls. So I'm also going to add a little garter tab and some other stuff just to help you get started on stuff. And yeah, so thank you all so much for joining me, and I hope that you can join me next week as well. I hope that this was helpful, and if you have any other questions come up or anything like that, just let me know. And I also have information on Instagram and my teeny tiny tutorials on YouTube. My Ravelry group has a lot of information in that as well. And if you're not on Ravelry, Facebook, I just started a Facebook group. So you can like come on over there and there will, we'll be there hanging out, knitting together, and yeah, join us. It's going to be really fun. I think it's going to be an enjoyable time. So thank you again for joining me and being on this lace journey with me. And I hope to see you next week and in between too. Don't be a stranger, and I will see you soon. Bye bye. Thank you.